It is the summer of 1456. 3 years after his mighty conquest of Constantinople, Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II now besieges the Hungarian fortress town of Belgrade with the full might of his grand army. The military occasion was to be paramount, as capturing the highly defended town would open up the door into Central Europe for further Muslim conquests. However, a ghost of the past in the form of the ever-resistant John Hunyadi now stood between the Sultan's ambitions for the future. Welcome to Season 2 of our grand series on the history of the Ottoman Empire. In our first season, we covered early Ottoman history up to the conquest of Constantinople in 1453. In this season, we will be looking at the golden age of the House of Osman. Clean-up operations. Upon conquering Constantinople after a climactic siege, Sultan Mehmed II had established his realm as one of the foremost powers of its age. With the final fall of the Eastern Roman Empire came an opportunity to rebrand its former seat of power into a new Islamic capital city. However, while the Red Apple was slowly being transformed, further military operations by the Sultan were conducted in the local region against the last pockets of resistance to his rule. The final Byzantine holdouts of Silivri and Epiphatos were captured after their local garrison surrendered upon hearing the fall of their capital, thus officially marking the end of 1400 years of Roman rule in Thrace. The two eastern Roman islands of Lemnos and Imbros had also managed to evade Ottoman occupation during the Great Siege. Regardless, with the shocking fall of Constantinople, the majority of the native Greek-speaking populace of the islands fled in horror to the safety of the Morea Peninsula. With the influential Genesese Gattilusio family taking over the islands in their stead, a new peace was established with Mehmed, which saw the Italian noble house becoming official Ottoman tributaries. Regardless, this peace was to be short, as in 1456 the Ottoman Sultan invaded the domains of the Gattilusio in the northern Aegean in order to consolidate his control over the local region. The islands of Imbros, Samothrace, Lemnos, Tenedos, and Thassos, and the mainland settlement of Enos were all swiftly captured in a single military campaign. Only the Gattilusio capital island of Lesbos, with its fortress town of Mytilene, was able to repel the Ottoman invasion. Likewise, the Genoese colony of Galata, which had proclaimed neutrality during the Great Siege, had surrendered to Ottoman authorities during the chaotic morning hours of May 29. The residents of the settlement were guaranteed their lives and property by Zaganos Pasha, who himself had been proclaimed Grand Vizier during the aftermath of Halil Pasha's fall from power. In return for these guarantees, the colony's walls were razed down to the ground, and local Turkish officials confiscated all weaponry and ammunition in the town. Affairs in the new capital. With the last vestiges of resistance in the local region defeated, Mehmed II now turned to the reconstruction of the war-ravaged Constantinople, which he wished to turn into his new seat of power. Foremost, the city was cleaned of its rubble from the recent siege while its land walls and main roads were repaired. Public buildings that had been desolate for centuries were also demolished, such as the Church of the Holy Apostles, the Hippodrome, and the Great Palace Complex. New housing and public buildings were constructed in the abandoned districts of the city alongside many new mosques. The most famous of the new mosques would be the Fatik Mosque, built between 1463 and 1470, and the Eyüp Sultan Mosque, built in 1458, both constructed to compete with the likeness of the newly converted Hagia Sophia Mosque. The Yedikule Fortress was also erected in 1458 at the former Byzantine Golden Gate as a place for errant Ottoman dignitaries. However, by the late 16th century, it was turned into a prison for foreign envoys. On top of mosques, dozens of bathhouses, public kitchens, schools, and charitable institutions in the form of Vakuf foundations were all constructed in the city. During the same period, a new political center in the form of an imperial palace, later dubbed the Old Palace, was also constructed on the former site of the Forum of Theodosius in 1458. It was here where Mehmed would house his royal household and imperial harem. However, wanting to outshine Roman palaces of old, another grander palace was constructed on the first hill of the city named the Topkapi Palace. It was from this new residence that the Sultan's royal court of governmental officials, later known as the Sublime Porte, was installed alongside the new Enderun school. This latter school for aspiring bureaucrats would cement Mehmed's policy of centralizing the state under a new Dev Shirma class of elites, thus displacing the well-established Turkoman elites of Anatolia, like the Shandarlu family who had produced 4 grand viziers to the House of Osman over the last century. In addition to buildings, Christian and Jewish families from all across Anatolia, Thessalonica, and the Morea were settled in the Fener and Balat districts of the deserted capital. This was done to restore Constantinople's commercial output, as many of its former citizens had been driven into slavery after the Great Siege. This settlement of new peoples around the empire was accompanied by the construction of the Grand Bazaar complex, which was finished in 1460, thus creating a brand new economic center for the Ottoman capital. Aside from the reconstruction of Constantinople, the most significant domestic measure taken by Mehmed during this period was the consecration of a new ecumenical patriarch of Constantinople. For centuries, holders of this office were seen as the spiritual leaders of the greater Eastern Orthodox world. However, with the fall of the city, the office had been left vacant. In order to gain the loyalty of the Orthodox population of his realm and drive a further political wedge between the Orthodox and Catholic churches, the Ottoman Sultan appointed the strict anti-unionist theologian Gennadius Scholarius as patriarch in 1454. This was followed up by the establishment of a new Jewish rabbinate and Armenian patriarchate during the same period, which saw the unofficial creation of the millet system in Ottoman governance. Since religion, rather than ethnicity, was seen as the primordial marker of national identity within the Ottoman framework of society, prominent religious leaders were now seen as figureheads representing their respective communities throughout the empire. Often, these religious leaders were heavily connected to the Sublime Porte through imperial appointments and approvals, which now gave the Sultan a new avenue of control over its non-Muslim minorities throughout the empire. In return for this top-down system of control, these religious communities were often permitted to form independent judicial courts to rule themselves, in which they could practice their local laws and collect their own taxes. All of Sultan Mehmed II's reconstruction efforts and political edicts would be fruitful. By the end of the century, Constantinople's population would soar to over 200,000 from a measly 50,000 in 1453. After many centuries of decline, it seemed like fate once again smiled on New Rome under the leadership of its new Islamic Caesar. War with Serbia, 1454 to 1456. By the spring of 1454, Mehmed II was feeling secure in his new capital city, and thus sent emissaries to despot Durad Branković of Serbia, demanding he relinquish Golubac and Smederevo, or else risk a full invasion from his armies. Fearing another coalition brewing up in the Balkans after his conquest of Constantinople, the Sultan decided to go on the offensive in the region. Although the Serbian despotate had stayed neutral in the military campaigns of 1453, its status as an impartial buffer state was questioned when Hungarian emissaries threatened war against the Sultan during the last weeks of the Great Siege. According to Ottoman chronicles, a scheming Durad was also ready to join such a war with Buda's full backing. After 30 days of hearing no response from the Serbian ruler, the Sultan officially declared war and began mustering his armies in Sofia and Plovdiv for the campaign to come. Only a year after the fall of Constantinople, war had now come to Serbia. By the summer of 1454, Mehmed invaded Serbia at the head of a 50,000-strong force, which was divided into two columns, one approaching Ostrovica and the other Smederevo. During the gruesome march, thousands of local peoples were carried off to slavery, while Ottoman Ekinci cavalry pillaged the countryside of all loot and supplies. In the chaos, despot Durad fled to Hungary in horror, while reinforcements under the leadership of John Hunyadi began slowly crossing the Danube. Nevertheless, these forces were to be too distant help. After weeks of being pounded by cannons, Ostrovica fell to Ottoman forces, thus giving the Sultan access to the prosperous mining settlements of the local region. However, the siege on Smederevo was to be less successful as its garrison put up fierce resistance. Feeling content with the many spoils he had acquired during the campaign, Mehmed discontinued the siege on the Serbian capital and left for Sofia. As the main Ottoman army retreated back to friendly territory, a force of 32,000 under Firuz Bey was left behind to resist the Serbians until the next campaigning season. In spite of the heavy losses back during the summer, local Serbian resistance in the city's rejuvenated local garrison repulsed all attempts. On the 21st of July, a final assault was ordered by the stubborn Sultan, which saw his elite janissaries breaching through the southern land walls and flooding into the city. However, a well-coordinated counter-assault from the inner citadel by Hunyadi himself would lead to a reversal of fortunes for the Turks. During the chaotic retreat, incoming cannon fire also killed the Beylerbey of Rumelia, Daya Karaka Pasha, in a surprising blow to the Ottoman army. To make matters even worse, a more serious problem for Mehmed than the failed assault arose. All the wagons and ropes used to transport his heavy artillery and munitions were also destroyed during an unexpected fire at night, thus rendering all of his deployed arms unmovable. With his siege on Belgrade turning into a disaster, Mehmed was eager to face Hunyadi in a pitched battle where he knew he could take out the Hungarian magnate once and for all. Ordering the abandonment of a number of tents on his left flank and ordering his cavalry to feign retreat from the area, the Sultan wished to entice the defenders of Belgrade to lose their discipline and start looting his camp. The experienced Hunyadi understood this feign and accordingly prohibited his troops from leaving the land walls. In spite of official orders, some in the garrison of the city began to leave their posts in small groups to loot the empty Ottoman camp, and some of their fellow brothers-in-arms soon joined them from the opposite bank of the Sava. Luring the Hungarians into his trap, Mehmed gave the orders to attack, which prompted Hunyadi and his forces on the walls to reluctantly join the grand melee down below. Although the Hungarians had fallen into the Sultan's trap, the feigned Ottoman cavalry that had left earlier in the day was yet to arrive back on the battlefield. As a result of Turkish battle coordination being in a state of disarray, Hunyadi's heavy knights were able to charge into the Turkish infantry, thus capturing many cannons and standards in the process. Seeing that the battle had shifted against him, Mehmed joined the fight himself, killing a number of enemy soldiers before later being struck in the thigh with an arrow and leaving the battlefield. As all seemed lost for the Ottoman Sultan, his feigned cavalry had returned to camp in the nick of time and managed to stabilize the Hungarian charge until both sides retreated for the night. While the sounds of the wounded echoed below Belgrade, Mehmed and his fellow pashas decided to end the siege. The following 2 days saw the once great Turkish host burying their dead and loading up the wounded in makeshift wagons before retreating down south. Virtually the entire Ottoman camp was left abandoned for the bloodied Hungarians, who began looting in earnest after the Turkish withdrawal. With between 13,000 and 23,000 troops lost in only 3 weeks, the siege of Belgrade was the first military defeat of Mehmed II's reign. Although unable to seize the Hungarian fortress city, fate would once more shine on the Ottomans, as in August, when plague struck Hunyadi's army. Only a month after his great victory over Mehmed, the Hungarian magnate, who had been a thorn in Ottoman expansion for over 16 years, would succumb to the now spreading epidemic. In December of the same year, despot Đurađ Branković of Serbia would also die at the age of 80, thus leaving his despotate in a state of political turmoil. By the start of 1457, Serbia re-entered Ottoman vassalship under Đurađ's second eldest son, Lazar Branković, but the childless ruler would die a year later. As a result, the leader of the pro-Ottoman faction in Serbia, Michael Angelović, invited Ottoman intervention into Serbia. By the spring of 1458, an Ottoman army under the Grand Vizier was at the gates of Smederevo. By the following year, the keys of the city were surrendered to local Ottoman authorities. Soon after, the fortresses of Rudnik and Golubac were also surrendered, thus bringing an end to the medieval Serbian state, which had persisted against Ottoman rule since the Battle of Kosovo back in 1389. With the fall of Serbia came new opportunities for Sultan Mehmed II to expand deeper into Europe. In the next episode, we will look at the Sultan's continuing wars against Skanderbeg and in Morea and Anatolia, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting, and sharing. It helps immensely. Our patrons and YouTube members can watch more than 200+ exclusive videos. Join their ranks via the link in the description or by pressing the join button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This form of guerrilla warfare persisted into the fall under the general command of Nikola Skobaljic, culminating in a surprising victory against the Ottomans at the Battle of Leskovac. By October, John Hunyadi's forces had also converged against Firuz Bey at the town of Kruševac, inflicting a defeat on the Ottoman general and even capturing him during the chaotic retreat. After the battle, the revenge-seeking Serbian-Hungarian armies marched into Ottoman territory, looting